Today in this country, there are no people who were born in 19th century. There are no such people already, not only in this country, but probably on the whole planet. The reason for that is obvious. They're all gone. Those who died from diseases we usually name as prematurely died. That means that those who died from aging died on time. So here you see the typical program of life, which consists of 2 periods. While we're developing and reaching reproductive age, and then unavoidably starts declining in all our functions, acquiring frailty, and finally dying. And this is the best scenario today. So I don't know how you, but I think it's very depressing to have this best case scenario. So the mystery of aging and death from aging and limitation of our longevity has been in people's mind forever. And fairy tales from the past are filled with recipes how one can rejuvenate himself. So illustration is this famous drawing by Lucas Cranach the Elder, Fountain of Youth, where you see one of these recipes. What is interesting that this picture drawn in 16th century was drawn at the times when the vast majority of people never reached aging because they were dying from infectious diseases, cholera, plague, smallpox, syphilis. So nevertheless, aging was already recognized as a mystery. Well, what we can do today, does medicine during last 100 years, which actually found cures to numerous diseases, did something with aging as well? Well, clearly at Lucas Cranach's times, aging and infectious diseases were clearly separated because plague attacked everybody with no difference whether they were children or senior people. However, after we dealt with infectious diseases and with antibiotics, we came to the era when people start dying from cancer, from cardiovascular disease. The diseases are clearly related to age. So one would expect that 100 years ago, when we still did not have antibiotics, and during this path from birth to death, we are losing lots of people. We lost lots of people for these diseases. 100 years later, the situation would change, and it does change. We know that there are huge demographic differences in our society versus society at that time. So a lot more people live till very senior age, and because of our success in treatment, first infectious and now cardiovascular diseases and cancer. So now when we celebrate this triumph of medicine, can we also celebrate the triumph of its defeating aging? Because intuitively you think that if average life of population today in civilized countries during the last 100 years increased more than 25 years, the length of life of the whole generation in the past, that you expect intuitively that should affect also the maximal longevity. Unfortunately, the answer appeared to be quite different. Because if you look what would happen with those people who successfully reached 90 and 100 years old today, by 120, there would be none. Today, recently, the oldest person in this country died who was 114 years old. And the oldest ever recorded person on this planet was 122 years old. So, which means that something mysterious is happening at this last part of our life. And regardless how healthy we are coming to this point, our destiny is actually already predetermined. We will die from increasing frailty. And all achievements of medicine, all our ability to treat diseases and rescue ourselves from this did not change this at all. This actually means very important thing, that there is something which I name a cliff of aging, so very sharp decline in our health which is occurring at the times above 90 years old, and which leads to unavoidable death, even the most healthy people with minimal diseases. And so then very strict hard stop in our life, which never could be more than 120 years. And this altogether means that there is some mysterious mechanism which is ticking in us, which you may name clock of life, which somehow determines our really ability to live as long as we can. And it looks like this mechanism is species specific, because as we all know, every species beside humans have very clear lifetime, which you never can cross. Mostly we know it, of course, from our pets. So, is there hope at all? Our common sense tells not, because during all our lifetime, we didn't see a single example of anybody who would avoid aging and live twice longer, at least twice longer than what others do. We don't see it not only in us, but also in pets. We do see it in non-mammals, but in mammals, it looks like, no, well, the hope is there. And the hopes come with these interesting creatures. So you don't see them every day because they live in warm countries underground, and they are typical rodents. They are the size of a mouse or rat, and they have very similar genetics. But the cardinal difference is that they live up to 10 times longer than their neighbors in their genus. For example, this creature on the top lives 10 times longer than a mouse and dies without frailty. And also these creatures never develop cancer. So dream animals. I frequently hear remarks, well, if I need to pay for longevity being with such an ugly appearance, I'm not sure how much I want that. Well, I'm usually thinking, well, if you are undressed, you may not be looking that attractive too. So, well, but what is important about these creatures? They give us inspirational example that technically mammals can live much longer and live without frailty, which means that they give us the inspiration to think that aging is not law of nature, which is unbreakable. And it's not another example of perpetuum mobile, which, as we all know, is impossible to build. Because these two creatures, they are, to a certain degree, perpetuum mobile. So, what does science tell us about this period of declining, of aging? What do we know today about this process, and what can we do from this knowledge? So, about 100 years ago, one of the first Nobel Prize winners, Ilya Mechnikov, in 1903, came up with the idea that aging resembles poisoning. I think we all intuitively can easily accept that because we all have depressing examples of people who are prematurely aging and dying, who are drug addicts or who are poisoning themselves with alcohol. So, he was thinking that about the possible source of this poisoning, and he came up with the idea that this poisoning is coming from the natural microflora, which with age changes and takes some toxic microorganisms which start poisoning us with the products of their secretion. Unfortunately, he was not right. But today's science did not go that far conceptually, because today our hopes in this poisoning theory is with these cells which appear here on the background of other cells as blue. We name them senescent cells. These cells do not exist in the body of us and animals when we are young, but they accumulate in large numbers in tissues when we become older and older. These senescent cells, they have a number of differences from normal cells. They look differently under microscope, but most importantly, they secrete a series of bioactive factors which create local inflammation around each of them. Since aging at the physiological level is associated with acquisition of systemic inflammation of unknown origin, there was an idea that maybe we should link acquisition and accumulation of these cells with poisoning, but the factors of their secretion. So this idea was supported by a number of works and recently became the most popular theory of aging today. And there are multiple laboratories in the world which are trying to make drugs which could selectively kill only senescent cells without touching others, and through that reach stopping the process of frailty and rejuvenation and good perspective of life. Well, I can tell you that there are already several papers which came out in top visibility journals describing the exploration of different senolytic compounds, and they leave mixed impression. On one hand, we clearly see that these animals which were treated against senescent cells, their quality of life somewhat improved. However, their longevity did not extend that much, not more than about 20%. Not a revolution, although, so the smell is that we're on the right track, but something is not exactly right here. So, and indeed, the suspicion is that the moment we stop treatment, senescent cells will come back, and after they come back, they will continue their bad work and returning us back to the track towards the grave. So, well, what can be done? If indeed we're on the right track, and we already have some good intermediate as a potential target for therapeutic intervention, maybe we just need to think a little deeper. And when you are dealing with, for example, international terrorism, what you can do, you can prevent terrorists from exploding their belts, for example. But would that stop terrorism? No. You need to deal with the system which creates them, which train them, which recruit them, which equip them. So senescent cells appear from something. And the hope is that when we find this something which creates senescent cells in our body, that would give us knowledge how to deal with them. So, and this is the not black but blue box, which till recently was a mystery for me. And now I will share with you what we found in it. And I hope that by finding it, we now can become much closer to the resolution. Because senescent cells, as we learned from our studies, is probably just tip of the iceberg, just only one of the types of cells which are damaged during our life and which accumulate and start poisoning us. And they better be seen as biomarkers of aging rather than being ultimate targets, which means that we need to find this garbage-producing mechanism and stop it from doing that. So what do we know about this mechanism? So hope is that we find this mechanism, will decipher the source of this cliff of aging, and we'll be able to do something with that. So we believe that cloak may be hidden in this box. So how to approach this cloak? Well, you may ask the question, what turns cell into senescence? And we know today that what turns cell into senescence is damage to their DNA. When we know that, we say, aha, it's very simple. DNA is damaged by what? By ultraviolet light, by gamma radiation, by smoking, carcinogens, by alcohol, because it creates reactive oxygen species and so on. So let's just change habits and we will be safe. But we all know that whatever you do with your habits, you may only increase your chance to reach this cliff relatively healthy, but you will not be able to move it. And we had the proofs of that in mice as well. Today, mice in this country live in conditions which are much more healthier than what we live in, because we are forcing them to do that by, even though they probably would not do it themselves. And do you think they live longer? Not really. Of course, they don't die from infectious diseases, but they still undergo the same process, which means that by living healthy life, it's a good thing to do, but don't think that it will make you long living. It makes you healthier dying. So, what is the source of this mysterious cloak? What is the nature of that? You remember that Mechnikov came up with the idea that parasites do it. Brilliant idea. I would say that he was absolutely right. The problem was that at that time, he knew only one source of parasites, bacteria in our guts. But he didn't know that parasites are much more abundant and much more intimately involved in our structure and our life because they are part of our own DNA. We know this for the last 50 years, but only today we start realizing what these parasites do. The problem is that about between 65 and 100 million years ago, the time when dinosaurs suddenly died, extinct, and the era of dinosaurs was switched to the era of mammals, of us, well, it was the period when viruses appeared of certain kind which were not recorded before, which actually represented pieces of DNA which started invading into our DNA of our ancestors and multiplying in it, creating numerous new copies and disrupting genes, changing their level of activity, and killing lots of individuals, probably leading to massive extinctions. I wouldn't be surprised that eventually we'll prove that dinosaurs died from this particular disease. The reason we know about that, because think about that, nearly 50% of length of our DNA consists of these viruses. Most of them are dead. Most of them are in our DNA such a long time that they acquired mutations which killed them. Until recently we thought that our genome is a cemetery, is a graveyard of viruses, which about 65 million years ago were the major source of extinction of mammals and vertebrates on this planet. So, and we are those lucky survivors who happen to keep these viruses in the safe place in their genome where they luckily did not do any bad. Well, recently we appeared to be wrong. We found that not that many, but few of them, and if you think about copy numbers, the copy numbers of these viruses reaches millions copies in our DNA. Some of them, several dozens, are actually alive and just deeply asleep. But they can be awake, and the probability of them waking up and start multiplying seems to be determined by species-specific mechanism. In mice, they're sleeping much less deeply than in humans. That's why mice live 2.5 years and humans about 90 today. Which means that these viruses, which are sleeping in us, but in principle capable of repeating what they have done long ago, may be that mysterious cloak, because by multiplying in our genome, they poison DNA, they break it, they create senescent cells and other types of damage, which later on lead to this flood of events leading to poisoning and death. Well, let's repeat what I just said. About 65 million years ago, there were no diversity of mammals. There were just very few of them. They were very universal, and they were not visible among tons of dinosaurs around. Then these viruses appeared, God knows from where, and they started invading massively in the genomes of these poor ancestors, creating diversity not only between those who died and survived, but also affecting their appearance. And that was the time when the whole origin of this enormous diversity of mammals goes back to. So, those who survived, and this was a very, very rough, turbulent period in our evolution, during which all these archetypes of mammals appeared. And after that, you see not much happened, only microevolution. So, those who survived, they not only managed to stop the amplification of these viruses, but they acquired them as a big part of their genome under conditions of certain depth of putting asleep, of silencing. In some organisms, they're silent completely or near completion, and this comes with the expectation how long they can do this without killing us, probably forming this species-specific clock with determined length of our life. What is very important, that this process is ongoing in every single cell in our body, so which means that this mechanism is implemented in every single cell in our body as a probability of awakening of endogenous viruses which can create DNA damage in somatic cell population in our body, thereby creating that garbage which eventually will kill us from frailty and aging. So, does this picture allow you anything to do? What does this knowledge mean to us? It looks depressing, it looks scary. It looks like every cell in our body has a little piece of uranium, which is kind of making holes in DNA and finally kills us. Well, surprisingly there is. Because knowing the mechanism of how these viruses amplify, we found that in our medical history, we dealt with viruses of remotely similar kind. And some of the antiviral drugs which we developed, not very efficiently, but sufficiently well working against mechanisms of replication of these viruses, good enough to allow us to take some of the drugs which today are being used to treat AIDS, HIV, could be used by us as a proof of principle to extend life of mice in which this process is ongoing. Today I can tell you that with some of the antiviral drugs, we can stop this process of amplification of these viruses, and we hope that it will have a dramatic positive impact on our ability to cardinally extend our longevity, stop acquisition frailty, and so on. So it's a targeted drug. It hits what we believe today is that mysterious cloak of life, which is the content of our DNA, which we acquired as parasites 65-100 million years ago. And this content is killing us by being insufficiently well repressed. So as a result, the cloak can be broken, and the flood of senescent cells, which this cloak creates while it's working, now will be drained and will dry out and no longer poison us. And today we have a real hope for the first time. We hope that this road to this cliff, which all of us at different stages at, we have a chance to avoid. And we can build the bridge with the help of these drugs, which we are working on right now, to avoid this cliff and go forward to the next disease which start killing us after we deal with aging. Thank you.